For 5 consecutive Christmases, my children deliberately excluded me. So I bought a $1.5 million mountain estate and caught them breaking into my home planning to claim it as their vacation spot. They never expected I'd have security cameras, a police officer, and a lawyer waiting when they showed up uninvited with suitcases for their surprise holiday. I wasn't supposed to discover their Christmas plans this year. The invitation that never came wasn't meant to be discussed in my presence. But when your 8-year-old grandson FaceTimes because he misses you, family secrets have a way of spilling out. Abuela, why aren't you coming for Christmas again? Emilio's innocent face filled my iPad screen, his forehead wrinkled in genuine confusion. I could see the familiar terracotta walls of my son Miguel's living room behind him, already adorned with holiday decorations. It was only December 1st. What do you mean, cariño? I kept my voice light, though something cold settled in my stomach. Papa said you're busy this year. Are you going somewhere fun instead? Can I come with you? I'm not sure what your father means, Emilio. No one has talked to me about Christmas plans yet. His little face scrunched up. But everyone's coming to our house. Mama's making lists. She has a special folder called Christmas 2023 with everyone's names. I saw it. Is my name on that list, Emilio? Before he could answer, a hand appeared taking the iPad from him. My daughter-in-law Valentina's perfectly made-up face replaced Emilio's. Emilio, you know you're not supposed to use the iPad without asking. She scolded, then noticed me. Oh, Elena, sorry about that. He's going through a boundary testing phase. Valentina, I was just asking Emilio about Christmas. It seems you're hosting... Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Oh, we're still finalizing details. Nothing set in stone. I see. I kept my face pleasantly neutral, a skill perfected over 62 years of life and 39 years of teaching university students. Well, when you finalize things, please let me know. I'd love to see the grandchildren. Of course, I should go. Emilio needs to finish his homework. Say goodbye to Abuela Emilio. I heard his muffled, Adios, Abuela, before the call ended. Sitting alone in my too quiet house, I stared at the blank screen for several long moments. This would be the 5th Christmas in a row. 5 years since Diego died. 5 years of increasingly transparent excuses. We're keeping it small this year. Mama, the kids have been exposed to something at school. We don't want to risk getting you sick. Oh, didn't Miguel tell you we changed plans last minute? I looked around the house that Diego and I had shared for 40 years, where we'd raised 3 children and hosted countless holiday gatherings. The house that had once burst with laughter arguments, and life now felt like a museum of memories. At that moment, something inside me, something that had been bending and accommodating for 5 lonely years, finally broke. Later that evening, I decided to check Sophia's Instagram page. My middle child rarely called anymore, but she documented every moment of her life online. There it was, a photo from last Christmas. The entire family gathered around a beautifully set table, Miguel and Valentina, Sophia, and her husband Carlos, my youngest Dante with his wife Isabella, all the grandchildren. Everyone tagged except me, because I wasn't there. The caption read, Annual Ramirez Family Christmas Tradition. So blessed to have everyone together. Had familia, Navidad, had traditions. Everyone. Except me. I opened my laptop and navigated to my banking portal. The balance of my account still startled me sometimes. Diego had been a brilliant financial planner, investing steadily throughout our marriage. Then there was my family inheritance from my father's restaurant chain, which had grown substantially under Diego's management. Our children had no idea, largely because Diego and I had chosen to live modestly, prioritizing experiences over possessions. They assumed the university professor's pension was all I had. They thought I needed their financial help, which made their neglect even more glaring. They didn't neglect me because they thought I was poor. They neglected me despite thinking I was poor. My finger hovered over the trackpad for only a moment before I clicked over to a real estate website. I'd been idly browsing mountain properties for months, a daydream, a way to imagine a different life. But suddenly it wasn't a daydream anymore. The next morning I pulled out the file cabinet keys Diego had left me. There was one drawer I'd never opened, his personal documents that seemed too painful to face after his death. But now something urged me to look. Inside I found investment records, property deeds, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. My hands trembled as I opened it, recognizing Diego's handwriting. Mi querida Elena, if you're reading this, I am gone, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for many things. I was not always the husband you deserved or the father our children needed. I put my career before our family too often, and I fear I taught our children to value success over compassion. What you don't know is that 15 years ago, I purchased land outside Santa Fe, 5 acres in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. I never told you because I wanted it to be a surprise for our retirement. The deed is in both our names. I've watched you sacrifice your dreams for mine for our children. When I'm gone, please don't continue sacrificing. Live the life you want. Our children have received every advantage, every opportunity. You owe them nothing more. Todo mi amor, Diego. I sat back stunned. The land alone would be worth a fortune now, and Diego, who rarely spoke of emotions, had seen more than I realized. I pulled out the deed. Sure enough, there it was, 5 acres of prime mountain real estate. Why hadn't anyone from the county contacted me about property taxes? I dug deeper and found records showing Diego had set up an automatic payment system that still drew from our investment account. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Mateo Vega, Diego's best friend and our family attorney. Elena, it's been too long. How are you? I'm discovering things, Mateo. I just found Diego's letter about the Santa Fe property. A long pause. He made me promise not to mention it unless you found it yourself. He wanted you to make that choice without influence. Did you know he felt he'd been a poor father, that he worried about the values our children learned? Another pause. Diego was complicated, Elena. Brilliant in business, sometimes blind in family matters. He realized too late that Miguel especially copied his worst traits, the ambition without the integrity. What do you mean? Mateo sighed. I shouldn't tell you this, but after Diego died, Miguel came to my office. He wanted to know if there was a way to gain control of your assets, claiming concerns about your mental capacity. I refused, of course. The shock of this betrayal felt physical, like a blow to my chest. Sophia and Dante, too. No, not directly. But they didn't object when Miguel floated the idea at a dinner I attended. They seemed to think it might be for your own good someday. I thanked Mateo and promised to call back soon. After hanging up, I sat among Diego's papers, a new clarity washing over me. I'd been blind to warning signs for years, the way my children spoke over me, their dismissive glances when I offered opinions, their suggestions that I might be happier in a retirement community. I returned to my laptop and scheduled a viewing for a property I'd admired online for weeks. A Spanish-style mountain estate with panoramic views, floor-to-ceiling windows, and complete privacy on 5 wooded acres near Santa Fe. It was listed at $1.5 million, a figure that would shock my children speechless. The realtor Adriana Montoya seemed skeptical when I arrived alone for the viewing the next day. This property is quite an investment, she said carefully, eyeing my sensible shoes and simple coat. Most of our buyers in this price range are couples or families looking for vacation homes. I'm not most buyers, I replied simply. As we toured the house, something settled in my chest, a feeling of rightness I hadn't experienced since before Diego died. The soaring windows that showcased the mountains beyond, the massive stone fireplace, the gourmet kitchen where I could finally try all those complicated recipes I'd saved. The tile work and architectural details that honored my Spanish heritage in a way my suburban Albuquerque home never had. There's a security system already installed, Adriana mentioned as we walked through the primary suite. The previous owners were quite security conscious. Top-of-the-line cameras, motion sensors, the works. The monitoring subscription would need to be reactivated, of course. I nodded, already imagining myself here. Safe. Independent. I'll take it, I said. Adriana blinked. Don't you want to think it over, perhaps discuss it with family? I've been thinking it over for months, I said truthfully, and my family isn't involved in my financial decisions. 2 weeks later, I signed the final paperwork and received the keys to my new home. The process had moved quickly thanks to my ability to make a substantial cash offer. As I drove up the winding road to what was now my mountain retreat, snowflakes began to fall, dusting the pines that lined the driveway. Inside, I walked from room to room, running my hands along countertops and window frames that belonged to me alone. No memories here, no ghosts, no disappointed expectations. I activated the security system, immediately setting up the app on my phone that would allow me to monitor the property from anywhere. Then I called the one person who had remained a true friend through everything. Mateo, it's Elena. I've done something either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. I laughed, the sound echoing in the empty house. And I could use some legal advice about establishing residency and updating my will. As I explained what I'd done, his initial surprise gave way to wholehearted support. "It's about damn time you did something for yourself, Ellie," he said warmly. "I'll come up this weekend to help you get settled. We'll review all the paperwork and make sure everything's in order." As I ended the call, I stood at the wall of windows, watching snow blanket the mountains. For the first time in 5 years, I was looking forward to Christmas, a Christmas that would be entirely my own. The first week in my mountain home passed in a blur of deliveries and decisions. I'd brought only personal items from my old house, choosing to furnish this new space entirely from scratch. Each purchase felt like a declaration. This is who I am now. This is what I like. No more accommodating Diego's preference for traditional furniture. No more keeping the children's outdated bedrooms pristine for visits that rarely happened. Every choice, from the sleek sectional sofa to the queen-sized bed with its adjustable base, prioritized my comfort alone. "You're nesting," Mateo observed on Friday evening, arriving with his overnight bag and a bottle of expensive champagne. His salt and pepper hair was dusted with snowflakes, his familiar face creased with a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "Is that what this is?" I laughed, taking the champagne. "I thought I was having a late-life crisis." "A crisis involves poor decision-making." This he gestured around the open-concept living area with its breathtaking Twilight Mountain view, "is possibly the most sensible thing you've done in years." After showing him to the guest room, I gave Mateo the full tour ending in the home office where I'd set up the security system's monitoring station. Multiple screens displayed feeds from cameras positioned around the property's perimeter and at each entrance. "Quite the command center," Mateo remarked, raising an eyebrow. "Planning for a siege." "Just being practical. I'm a woman living alone in a relatively remote location." I didn't mention my nagging fear that my children might not respect my boundaries once they discovered my new home. Some instinct told me to keep that concern to myself for now. Over dinner at Bouillabaisse, I'd always wanted to try cooking, but never had because Miguel claimed to hate seafood. Mateo helped me work through the practicalities of my new life. We discussed updating my will, changing my official residence, and notifying relevant institutions of my new address. "What about the old house?" he asked, refilling our wine glasses. "I'm considering selling it," I admitted. "There's nothing keeping me there anymore." A flash of concern crossed his face. "Have you told your children about any of this?" "Not yet." I traced the rim of my glass, avoiding his gaze. "They haven't called. Not even to discuss Christmas plans that apparently don't include me." Mateo's expression darkened. He'd witnessed my increasing isolation over the past 5 years, had seen how my children's visits became shorter and less frequent, how they forgot to include me in family gatherings while simultaneously making comments about my modest lifestyle and suggesting senior living facilities. "They take after their father in all the wrong ways," he said quietly. Diego had been brilliant and driven, but also controlling and status-conscious. I'd balanced those tendencies during our marriage, but without my influence, those traits had flourished unchecked in our children. I keep wondering where I went wrong. I confessed the wine loosening my usual reserve. Was I too indulgent? Too critical? Did I not teach them empathy? "You didn't go wrong, Elena. Some people make selfish choices even when raised with better values." He reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "The question now is, what do you want your relationship with them to look like going forward?" I considered this as we moved to the sofa with our wine. The fireplace cast a warm glow over the room, snow falling gently beyond the windows. "I want a relationship based on mutual respect," I said finally. "Not obligation, not pity, and certainly not convenience when it suits them." Mateo nodded thoughtfully. "Then perhaps this," he gestured around the room, "is the perfect opportunity to reset those expectations." The next morning brought more snow and an unexpected visitor. I was arranging newly delivered books on the shelves when the security system chimed, alerting me to movement at the front entrance. On the monitor, I saw a man in his early 40s wearing a heavy jacket, a police department knit cap pulled over his ears. He carried a basket of some kind and was looking directly at the doorbell camera. "Good morning," he said, his voice coming through the system speaker. "I'm Javier Cruz, your neighbor from down the road. Thought I'd welcome you to the mountain." I hesitated only briefly before using the intercom. "That's very kind. I'll be right there." Javier Cruz stood a good 6 inches taller than my 5'5" frame, with broad shoulders and a face weathered by outdoor living. Despite his imposing physical presence, his smile was gentle as he handed me the basket. "Homemade sourdough, local honey, and a decent bottle of whiskey," he explained. "Mountain essentials." "That's incredibly thoughtful. Would you like to come in for coffee? I just made a fresh pot." Over steaming mugs at my kitchen island, I learned that Javier was a police officer currently on medical leave, recovering from a shoulder injury sustained in the line of duty. He lived year-round in a cabin about half a mile down the mountain road. "Not many full-timers up here," he noted, glancing appreciatively around the house. "Most properties are weekend retreats for city folks who rarely bother to introduce themselves." "I'm planning to live here permanently," I explained, surprising myself with how right those words felt. "I recently retired from teaching Spanish literature at the university." "On your own?" he asked, then immediately backpedaled. "Sorry, that's none of my business." "It's fine. Yes, I'm on my own. My husband passed away 5 years ago and my children have their own lives." The simplified version of a complicated reality. Javier nodded, seeming to understand what I wasn't saying. "Well, mountain neighbors look out for each other. I'm just down the road if you ever need anything." He scribbled his number on a notepad on my counter. "Cell service can be spotty during storms, but I've got a landline that never fails, and I'm usually home these days while this shoulder heals." "Gracias," I replied, automatically slipping into Spanish. His eyes lit up. "Hablas español?" "Sí, es mi lengua materna. I'm from Madrid, originally came to the States for graduate school and never left." "Mi familia es de Chihuahua," he said with a smile. 3 generations in New Mexico now, but we keep the language alive. After he left, I stood at the window watching him navigate the snowy path back to the road. There was something reassuring about knowing someone was nearby, someone who had chosen this same solitude but remained open to connection. That evening, as Mateo prepared to return to the city, he noticed Javier's number on the counter. "Making friends already?" he asked with a smile. "Just getting to know the neighbors," I replied. "Javier says there aren't many year-round residents." "Javier, is it?" Mateo's eyebrows rose teasingly. "Should I be jealous that you've replaced me as your emergency contact so quickly?" I laughed and swatted his arm. "Don't be ridiculous. He's young enough to be my son." "And much more attentive than your actual sons," Mateo observed pointedly as we hugged goodbye at the door. He held me a moment longer than usual. "I'm proud of you, Elena. This is your second act. Make it everything you want it to be." Watching his taillights disappear down the snowy road, I felt a curious lightness. For the first time in decades, my life was entirely my own to shape. 2 weeks passed in peaceful solitude. I established routines that pleased no one but myself. Morning yoga facing the mountains. Afternoons reading by the fireplace. Evenings experimenting with complex recipes I'd always wanted to try. I spoke with Mateo every few days and exchanged friendly waves with Javier when our paths crossed on the private road we shared. I'd almost forgotten about Christmas until my phone rang on December 18th. Miguel's name appeared on the screen, my first contact from any of my children since moving to the mountain. "Mama," he said when I answered, his voice carrying that familiar note of forced patience. "Where have you been? I've tried calling the house twice this week." "Hello, Miguel. I've been at home." "No, you haven't. I drove by yesterday and the house was dark. Your car wasn't in the driveway." So he'd been checking up on me. Not out of concern, I suspected, but to confirm I'd be alone for Christmas again, making their exclusion less guilt-inducing. "I've moved," I said simply. A beat of silence. Moved where you didn't say anything about moving." "I wasn't aware I needed permission." The words came out sharper than I'd intended, years of suppressed hurt finding their voice. "Of course you don't need permission." He backpedaled quickly. "It's just, this is sudden. Where are you living now? Some senior community?" The assumption stung. "No, Miguel. I've bought a house in the mountains." "You've what?" His shock would have been comical under different circumstances. "Mama, that's... How could you possibly afford..." "Your father and I were always good with money," I replied, deliberately vague. "But your pension, the maintenance on mountain properties, the isolation..." He seemed to be processing out loud, recalibrating his understanding of my circumstances in real time. "I'm perfectly comfortable, thank you. Now, is there something specific you were calling about?" Another pause. "Actually, yes. We've been trying to finalize Christmas plans. Sophia and Dante are bringing the kids to our house for Christmas Eve. Then we're all thinking of taking a little holiday trip someplace with snow for the children." The perfect opening. Yet he still wasn't inviting me. 5 years of exclusion had made it habitual. "That sounds lovely," I hope you all enjoy yourselves. Right. Well, he cleared his throat. You'll be all right on your own for the holidays. I'm planning my own Christmas this year, I said truthfully. Something special. After ending the call, I sat watching snowflakes dance outside the windows, uneasiness settling over me. The conversation felt like reconnaissance, Miguel confirming I had no expectations of inclusion before finalizing their plans. My suspicions were confirmed 2 days later when the security system alerted me to a vehicle approaching. Through the kitchen window, I recognized Miguel's luxury SUV crawling up my driveway, moving slowly as if the driver was uncertain of the destination. The vehicle stopped. Miguel emerged, looking up at the house with an expression of disbelief. He snapped several photos with his phone before returning to his car and driving away. I called Mateo immediately. He didn't even knock, I explained, watching Miguel's car disappear down the mountain road on the security feed. Just took pictures and left. That's concerning, Mateo said, his lawyer's caution evident. How did he even find your address? I'm not sure. I hadn't shared my new address with any of my children yet. The property records wouldn't be updated this quickly, would they? Unlikely. Could he have followed you? Or perhaps the real estate agent mentioned something. We ended the call with Mateo promising to check if the property transfer had been recorded publicly yet. I tried to dismiss my uneasiness, but that night I double-checked every door and window before bed. The next morning brought a flurry of texts from all 3 of my children, the most communication I'd received from them in months. From Miguel, Mama, we need to talk about this house situation. Call me ASAP. From Sophia, since when do you have money for a vacation home? We need to discuss this as a family. From Dante, are you sure this purchase is a good idea at your age? Living alone in the mountains seems risky. I responded to none of them, choosing instead to drive into town for groceries and final Christmas preparations. I decided to host a small dinner on Christmas Eve, just myself, Mateo, and Javier, who had mentioned having no family nearby. When I returned home that afternoon, loaded with packages and food, something felt immediately wrong. The security system showed no alerts, but a subtle difference in the arrangement of the entryway bench caught my attention. I set down my bags and checked the security app on my phone, reviewing footage from the past few hours. At 2:17 p.m., a car I recognized as Sophia's had pulled into my driveway. The exterior camera captured her and Dante approaching my front door, looking around furtively. Sophia reached into her purse and pulled out what appeared to be a key. My heart raced as I watched them let themselves into my home. My home. The interior cameras showed them wandering through every room, opening closets, examining furniture, peering at price tags I hadn't yet removed. Their commentary was picked up clearly by the microphones. This place must have cost at least $1 million, Sophia said, running her hand along my new kitchen countertop. Where the hell did she get that kind of money? Dad must have had investments we didn't know about, Dante replied, opening my refrigerator and helping himself to a bottled water without hesitation. She certainly couldn't afford this on a teacher's pension. Did you see the view? This location is prime real estate. Think about the family gatherings we could host here. So much better than her old house. Miguel's already making plans. We're all coming up for Christmas. Surprise her, he says. Sophia laughed as if this was somehow still her decision. My hands shook as I fast-forwarded through their 40-minute invasion of my privacy. Before leaving, Sophia placed something on the kitchen counter, a spare key which she pointed to while saying something to Dante about making sure everyone has access. I checked the front door. It was locked, meaning they had relocked it when leaving. If I hadn't reviewed the security footage, I might never have known they had been inside my home. Fighting rising panic, I called Mateo, then Javier. Within 30 minutes, both men arrived. Javier still in his police uniform from an earlier shift. They had a key. I said, my voice steadier than I felt as I showed them the footage. Sophia used a key to enter my house without permission. The only way they could have a key is if someone from the real estate transaction provided it, Mateo said grimly, which would be highly unethical, possibly illegal. Javier studied the security footage with professional focus. This is textbook trespassing, he confirmed. Having a key doesn't grant legal permission to enter someone's home without consent. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the kitchen island. They're planning to come here for Christmas, all of them. Miguel said they're going to surprise me. Do you want to change the locks? Javier asked practically. I want them to understand they can't just invade my life whenever it suits them. I replied, a lifetime of accommodating suddenly giving way to righteous anger. I want them to face consequences, for once. Mateo and Javier exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. What did you have in mind? Mateo asked carefully. I want to be prepared when they arrive. I said, my resolve strengthening. Not caught off guard, not emotional, not vulnerable. I want to meet them from a position of power. Javier nodded approvingly. The element of surprise should be yours, not theirs. Exactly. I paced the kitchen ideas, forming rapidly. They think they're surprising me, but we'll be waiting for them. The question is, what exactly do I want to happen when they show up? Mateo leaned against the counter, his legal mind already working. We should consider the practical aspects first. When do you think they'll arrive? Christmas Eve seems most likely, I reasoned, based on Sophia's comments about Miguel's plans. That gives us 3 days to prepare. Javier said, his tactical training evident in his approach. First priority is securing the property. I'd recommend changing the locks immediately. I agree, Mateo added. We should also find out how they obtained a key in the first place. The next morning, I called Adriana, my real estate agent, and explained the situation as diplomatically as possible. Mrs. Ramirez, I'm absolutely horrified. She responded, genuine distress in her voice. I can assure you no one from our agency would provide keys to anyone without your explicit authorization. Yet somehow my daughter has a key to my house, I replied, keeping my tone measured. A house whose address I haven't shared with any of my children. After promising to investigate immediately, Adriana called back within the hour. I've discovered what happened, she said, her voice tight with professional embarrassment. Your son Miguel contacted our office last week, claiming to be helping you move. He said you were having mobility issues and had asked him to coordinate some deliveries. The calculated nature of the deception made my stomach turn. And someone believed this without verifying with me. One of our new administrative assistants. Yes, she provided a key to him, thinking she was being helpful. I've already initiated disciplinary proceedings. This is a serious breach of protocol. By that afternoon, a locksmith had changed every external lock on the house, and Javier had helped me upgrade the security system to include alerts for any attempted use of invalid keys. Mateo, meanwhile, had drawn up a formal notice of trespass that could be presented if necessary. You're sure you want to take such a hard line? Mateo asked as we reviewed the document. Once certain legal boundaries are established, it may be difficult to return to a more casual family relationship. I considered his words carefully, looking out at the mountains that had become my sanctuary. I'm not doing this to punish them, Mateo. I'm doing it to establish clear boundaries. For too long, they've treated me as an accessory to their lives, someone to be included or excluded at their convenience. That ends now. Javier arrived that evening with takeout from the local Thai restaurant, joining Mateo and me for an impromptu strategy session. As a police officer, his perspective was invaluable. Based on the security footage, they clearly entered without permission, he confirmed. That constitutes criminal trespass in this state. However, they could claim they believed they had implicit permission since Miguel obtained the key through seemingly legitimate means. So what are our options? I asked, picking at my pad thai. Several approaches, Javier said thoughtfully. The most confrontational would be to report the trespass officially, which could result in criminal charges. Less severe would be to simply prevent their entry when they arrive and inform them they're not welcome without invitation. Mateo raised a third possibility. Or you could allow them in on your terms. Let them arrive thinking they're surprising you, only to find you fully prepared and in control of the situation. A psychological rather than legal approach. Javier nodded. Potentially very effective. The idea resonated with me. After years of being dismissed and marginalized, there was a certain appeal to turning the tables completely. I like that option, I decided. Let them come thinking I'll be pathetically grateful for their presence, only to discover I've built a life that doesn't revolve around waiting for their attention. We spent the next hour outlining a detailed plan for Christmas Eve. Mateo would arrive early, providing legal backup if needed. Javier would be present in his official capacity, his uniform a clear symbol of authority. And I would be ready to reclaim my narrative completely. There's one more thing, I said as our planning concluded. I need to know exactly what they're expecting, which means I need to contact the one person who won't lie to me. The next morning I called Emilio under the pretext of asking what he wanted for Christmas. We're coming to see you, he blurted excitedly before I could even broach the subject. Dad says we're all going to your new house for Christmas. It's supposed to be a surprise, but I already know. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart, I said, keeping my tone light. Did Dad say when you're all coming? Christmas Eve, we're bringing all our presents and staying for 3 whole days. Mom says your house has lots of bedrooms for everyone. Did she? How thoughtful of her to make plans for my house. Dad says it's the perfect place for our family Christmas tradition. Emilio continued innocently. He's bringing the special nog that grown-ups drink, and Aunt Sophia is planning where to put the Christmas tree. Uncle Dante says there's probably a hot tub. Each word was a fresh revelation of their presumption. They weren't just visiting. They were appropriating my home entirely, planning to impose their traditions in my space without a single consideration for my wishes. After ending the call with Emilio, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes. The completeness of their entitlement was breathtaking. They hadn't just excluded me from their Christmas plans for 5 years, they now intended to commandeer my private retreat for their own convenience. That evening, when Javier stopped by to install additional security cameras, I shared what I'd learned. They're planning to stay for 3 days, I explained, unable to keep the disbelief from my voice. They've already decided where to put their tree, which rooms they'll use. Everything. Not a single one of them has actually asked if they're welcome here. Javier's expression darkened. This goes beyond presumptuous. They're treating your home as community property. Exactly. I handed him a cup of tea, our evening ritual developing naturally over the past days. Which means our Christmas Eve reception needs to be absolutely clear. This is my home, my life, my choice who enters and who doesn't. Are you prepared for the potential fallout? He asked gently. Family confrontations around holidays can leave lasting damage. I gazed out at the snow-covered mountains, their enduring presence a reminder of my own newfound strength. The damage has already been done, Javier. For 5 years, they've shown me exactly where I stand in their lives. All I'm doing now is showing them where they stand in mine. Christmas Eve morning dawned clear and cold. Sunlight glittered across untouched snow like scattered diamonds. I woke early, a mixture of determination and nervous energy propelling me through my morning routine. Today, everything would change, either the beginning of honest relationships with my children or the final acknowledgement that those relationships had been irreparably damaged by years of neglect. Despite my outward resolve, I found myself gripping the bathroom counter, suddenly breathless. What if I was overreacting? What if confronting my children destroyed what little relationship we had left? For a moment, I felt like the confused widow they believed me to be, not the strong woman I'd become. No, I whispered to my reflection. You deserve respect. They've had 5 years to include you. 5 years of excuses. I'd spent the previous day transforming the house into exactly the Christmas environment I wanted. No concessions to my children's preferences. No accommodations for grandchildren I rarely saw. Instead, I decorated with elegant simplicity white lights woven through fresh pine garlands on the mantelpiece, a small, tasteful tree adorned with the antique glass ornaments my mother had left me, and sophisticated table settings for 3 myself, Mateo and Javier for Christmas Eve dinner. The guest rooms remained conspicuously untouched. No extra towels, no turned-down beds, no special accommodations for unexpected visitors. Every aspect of the house made one statement: this is my home arranged for my pleasure, not a hotel awaiting your arrival. At 9 Tezuris, Mateo called to confirm his plans. I'll arrive around 2 Tezuris, he said. That gives us plenty of time to review everything before your children's expected arrival. Perfect. Javier is coming at 1 Hari to help with final security preparations. How are you feeling, Elena? Mateo's voice softened with concern. I considered the question, looking out at the pristine landscape. Remarkably calm. For the first time in years, I feel completely in control of my own life. After ending the call, I checked my appearance in the mirror. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, not the comfortable but shapeless clothes my children were accustomed to seeing me in, but a well-tailored burgundy dress that highlighted my still trim figure, paired with the pearl necklace Diego had given me on our 30th anniversary. My silver hair was freshly styled in a modern cut that framed my face elegantly, and I'd taken extra care with makeup emphasizing my eyes. The woman looking back at me didn't resemble anyone's fading grandmother. She looked confident, sophisticated, and very much in command of her circumstances. Javier arrived precisely at 1 Hezria dressed in his full police uniform, rather than the casual clothes I'd grown accustomed to seeing him in. The official appearance was intentional. We'd agreed his presence should communicate authority rather than merely friendship. The roads are clear, he he reported, stamping snow from his boots in the entryway. No traffic issues that might delay their arrival. Good. Everything needs to proceed on our timeline, not theirs. We spent the next hour reviewing the security system and finalizing our strategy. Javier had positioned additional cameras to capture the driveway approach and every entrance to the house. All feeds were now displayed on multiple devices, the monitoring station in my office, Javier's tablet, and my phone, ensuring we'd have comprehensive awareness of my family's arrival and movements. Remember, Javier said as we finished, you're in control here. This is your house, your rules, your boundaries. Don't let them flip the script. I won't, I promised, grateful for his steady presence. When Mateo arrived at Tuazi bringing a bottle of expensive champagne for celebrating afterward, the three of us conducted a final walkthrough of the house. Every detail was perfect, from the elegant holiday decorations to the tantalizing aroma of the beef Wellington slowly cooking in the oven, a sophisticated Christmas Eve dinner for three. The table settings are a particularly nice touch, Mateo observed, nodding at the dining room with its three carefully arranged place settings. The physical evidence that you weren't expecting them speaks volumes. That's precisely the point, I agreed. I've moved on, created my own traditions. They need to understand I'm no longer waiting by the phone for their attention. At 3:30, Javier's tablet chimed with an alert. Vehicle approaching, he announced, showing us the feed from the driveway camera. Miguel's SUV led the procession, followed by Sophia's crossover and Dante's sports car. I counted heads as they parked. All three of my children, their spouses, and 5 grandchildren, ranging from Emilio's 8 years to Sophia's daughter Lucia's teenage 15. 10 people arriving unannounced, expecting accommodations in a house prepared for 3. Are you ready? Mateo asked quietly, standing beside me at the window as we watched them unload luggage and wrapped gifts. Completely, I assured him, though my heart had begun to race. Javier positioned himself discreetly in the kitchen, visible enough to be noticed, but not immediately confrontational. We watched on the monitor as Sophia approached the front door key in hand. Her first attempt to insert it failed, as did her second. Confusion crossed her face as she realized the locks had been changed. After a brief consultation with Miguel, she pressed the doorbell instead. The chime echoed through the house as I smoothed my dress, took a deep breath, and moved to answer it with deliberate, unhurried steps. Sorpresa! Multiple voices chorused as I opened the door, their faces arranged in expressions of exaggerated excitement that faltered slightly when they registered my appearance, elegant, composed, and clearly not surprised at all. Hello, I said pleasantly, making no move to step aside and allow entry. This is unexpected. Miguel recovered first, his salesman's smile sliding back into place. Merry Christmas, Mama. We thought we'd surprise you with a family holiday at your new place. He gestured expansively at the assembled group. Everyone's here. So I see, I replied, still blocking the doorway. How thoughtful of you to decide how I should spend Christmas in my own home. An uncomfortable silence descended as my less than enthusiastic response registered. Valentina shifted awkwardly beside Miguel, while the younger grandchildren looked confused by the tension. Dante's wife Isabella checked her watch impatiently. Mama, Sophia said with a nervous laugh. It's freezing out here. Can we come in? That depends, I said calmly. Did any of you consider calling to ask if I was available to host 10 people for Christmas, or whether I had my own plans? Dante stepped forward, employing the cajoling tone he used when he thought I was being difficult. Come on, Mama. We wanted to surprise you. You're always saying you want to see more of the grandkids. A surprise visit is dropping by for coffee, Dante. Not arriving with luggage for a 3-day stay without invitation. Miguel's expression darkened. Mama, you're being ridiculous. It's Christmas. Family should be together. I agree completely, I said. Which is why it's so interesting that this is the first Christmas in 5 years that any of you have wanted to include me in your plans. Coincidentally, right after I purchased a desirable mountain property. The stunned silence that followed was broken by Emilio's innocent voice. Daddy, you said Abuela would be happy to see us. The genuine confusion in his voice nearly broke my resolve. But I reminded myself this wasn't about punishing my grandchildren. It was about establishing boundaries their parents had trampled for years. I am always happy to see you, Emilio, I said gently, but right now I need to speak with your parents about some adult matters. I stepped aside, finally allowing them to enter the foyer, where they immediately noticed Javier standing in his police uniform, watching silently from the kitchen doorway. Miguel froze mid-step. Mama, why is there a police officer in your house? This is Officer Javier Cruz, I said, closing the front door behind my bewildered family. He's here because I have concerns about unauthorized entry to my home. Unauthorized entry? Sophia's voice rose in confusion. What are you talking about? Perhaps we should all move to the living room, I suggested calmly. Children, there's hot chocolate and cookies in the kitchen if you'd like some. Valentina hesitantly shepherded the younger grandchildren toward the kitchen, while 15-year-old Lucia and 13-year-old Marco remained clearly intrigued by the unfolding adult drama. Mateo stepped forward from where he'd been observing in the living room. I'm Mateo Vega, he introduced himself with professional courtesy. Mrs. Ramirez's attorney. Attorney? Miguel's face flushed. Mama, what the hell is going on? I gestured toward the seating area. Please sit down. We have matters to discuss before we determine whether this surprise visit of yours can proceed. They complied reluctantly, exchanging alarmed glances as they arranged themselves on the sofas facing the fireplace. I remained standing, a deliberate choice to maintain the position of authority in my own home. 2 days ago, I began, my voice steady. Sophia and Dante entered this house without my knowledge or permission, using a key that Miguel obtained through deception. That's ridiculous, Dante protested immediately. We were just checking out the place, Sophia interjected, shooting him a warning glance. We were excited about your new home, Mama. So excited that you didn't bother to call first, or knock, or wait for an invitation. I gestured toward the large monitor on the wall which Javier had cued with the security footage. Perhaps this will refresh your memory. The screen came to life, showing Sophia and Dante furtively approaching my front door, looking around before using the key. Their recorded voices filled the room as they wandered through my house, making comments about the furniture, discussing which bedrooms they'd claim for their families, and speculating about my finances. Miguel's already making plans. We're all coming up for Christmas. Surprise her, he says. Sophia's recorded voice echoed through the suddenly silent room, as if this is somehow still her decision. Her recorded laughter followed. I paused the footage, observing their reactions. Sophia's face had drained of color. Dante stared at his shoes. Miguel looked thunderstruck, perhaps realizing his siblings had implicated him directly. That's an invasion of privacy, Sophia finally sputtered. You can't just record people without their knowledge. Actually, Javier spoke for the first time, his official tone filling the room. Homeowners have the legal right to maintain security systems on their property, including video surveillance. What they don't have a right to do is enter someone else's home without permission, which is criminal trespass under state law. We had a key, Dante protested. Obtained through false pretenses, Mateo countered smoothly. Miguel contacted the real estate office claiming Mrs. Ramirez needed assistance due to mobility issues, a complete fabrication designed to gain unauthorized access to her property. All eyes turned to Miguel, whose salesman's composure had completely evaporated. I was just trying to help, he said weakly. We wanted to see the place before Christmas. You could have asked, I said simply. You could have called and said, Mama, we'd love to see your new home. May we visit? Instead, you chose deception, invasion, and presumption. Presumption? Valentina had returned from settling the younger children in the kitchen. We're family. Family doesn't need formal invitations. Apparently I do, I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. For 5 years, I've needed an invitation to Christmas gatherings that never came. 5 years of we're keeping it small this year, and we've made other plans. 5 years of seeing my grandchildren only when it was convenient for you. A heavy silence fell over the room. Lucia, old enough to understand the implications, looked between her parents and me with dawning comprehension. You never invited Abuela for Christmas, she asked her mother. Not once in 5 years, Sophia shifted uncomfortably. It's complicated, honey. It's actually quite simple, I corrected gently. I became inconvenient after your grandfather died. Too much effort. Too old-fashioned. Too unnecessary. Until I acquired something desirable, this house, and suddenly I'm worthy of inclusion in the family Christmas. That's not fair, Miguel protested, though his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Then explain why you told Emilio I was busy this Christmas when you hadn't bothered to ask if I had plans. Explain why you felt entitled to enter my home without permission. Explain why you brought luggage for a 3-day stay without once considering whether I might want 10 unexpected house guests. No one seemed able to formulate a response. Javier shifted slightly, his uniform catching the light, a reminder of the potential consequences hovering over the situation. Are we? Dante finally ventured. Are we being charged with something? That depends on you, I answered. I have no desire to press charges against my own children. What I want is acknowledgement, respect, and genuine connection, not to be treated as an afterthought or a convenience. Mateo stepped forward holding a document. Mrs. Ramirez has prepared a simple statement of understanding. It acknowledges the unauthorized entry establishes clear expectations about future visits, requiring explicit invitation, and outlines a path forward for rebuilding family relationships based on mutual respect. You want us to sign a contract to visit our own mother? Sophia asked incredulously. No, I corrected her. I want you to recognize that I am a person with autonomy, boundaries, and feelings, not a resource to be accessed when convenient and ignored when not. The document is merely a formal acknowledgement of that reality. The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected voice. Lucia, my teenage granddaughter, stood up from where she'd been sitting beside her mother. I'll sign it, she said firmly. Abuela deserves better than how we've treated her. The simple statement from a 15-year-old cut through the tension like a knife. Sophia looked at her daughter in surprise, then slowly back at me, really seeing me perhaps for the first time in years. Mama, she began, her carefully maintained facade cracking slightly. We never meant to make you feel excluded. Intentions matter less than actions, I replied not unkindly. For 5 years, your actions have spoken clearly about my place in your lives. Miguel, ever the pragmatist, assessed the situation with newfound clarity. So, where does this leave us now? Are we supposed to just leave on Christmas Eve? I looked around at my children, their spouses, my grandchildren, who were innocent parties in this adult conflict, the carefully prepared dinner for 3 in my dining room, the plans I'd made for a quiet, dignified holiday on my own terms. That, I said finally, depends entirely on what happens next. For several long moments, no one spoke. The crackling fire and distant sounds of the younger children in the kitchen were the only noises breaking the tense silence. I remained standing, watching my 3 adult children process the reality of their situation, caught in deception, confronted with evidence and finally facing consequences for years of thoughtless behavior. Miguel was the first to recover, his businessman's instinct for damage control taking over. Mama, clearly we've made some serious mistakes here, he began, his tone conciliatory. We should have called first. Obviously, the key situation was inappropriate. Inappropriate, I repeated the word, letting its inadequacy hang in the air. Breaking into my home and planning to commandeer it for your holiday convenience goes well beyond inappropriate, Miguel. Sophia wiped discreetly at her eyes, her carefully applied makeup beginning to smudge. We never thought of it as breaking in, she said quietly. In your minds, you'd be happy to have us all together, without asking me. Without considering that I might have made my own plans after 5 years of solitary holidays. Dante, always the most defensive of my children, shifted restlessly. You're making it sound like we deliberately excluded you all these years. That's not fair. We've all been busy. Lives get complicated. Too busy for a phone call, I interrupted. Too complicated to extend a simple invitation. I never expected any of you to prioritize me above your own families, Dante. I just wanted to be considered part of those families. Lucia stood up suddenly. I want to know why we never visited Abuela for Christmas, she announced, looking directly at her mother. You always said she preferred quiet holidays, that she didn't like traveling in winter. Sophia flinched visibly. Lucia, please, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time, I countered. Lucia deserves honest answers. All the grandchildren do. I turned to my granddaughter Hart, aching at how much she'd grown in the glimpses I'd been allowed of her life. I never said I preferred quiet holidays, Lucia. Quite the contrary. I've called every December for 5 years asking about Christmas plans. Valentina cleared her throat. In all fairness, Elena, you have to admit you don't exactly fit with our usual celebrations. The children have certain expectations for Christmas, traditions we've established. Traditions that deliberately excluded their grandmother. I finished for her. How convenient to establish traditions that justified leaving me out. Javier shifted slightly from his position near the doorway, a subtle reminder of his presence. Perhaps, he suggested professionally, this would be a good moment to consider the agreement Mr. Vega mentioned. Mateo stepped forward with the document. This isn't legally binding in a traditional sense, he explained. Rather, it's a clear articulation of boundaries and expectations going forward. A reset, if you will. Miguel accepted the papers, scanning them with a frown. This feels excessive. We're family. We shouldn't need written agreements. Apparently we do, I replied evenly, because verbal understandings and basic respect haven't been sufficient. As Miguel read through the document, Emilio appeared in the doorway, his small face troubled. Is Christmas canceled? He asked, looking around at the tense adult faces. The innocent question pierced through the confrontation, reminding me that my grandchildren were blameless in this situation. Whatever grievances I had with my children, the little ones deserved a joyful holiday. No, sweetheart, I answered gently. We're just deciding what kind of Christmas we're going to have. Valentina moved to shepherd Emilio back to the kitchen, but I raised my hand to stop her. Let him stay. In fact, let's have all the children join us. They should understand what's happening. After the remaining grandchildren were gathered, I addressed them directly. I love all of you very much. I began making eye contact with each small face, and I've missed you terribly during all the holidays we haven't shared. Your parents and I are trying to figure out how we can be a better family going forward, one where everyone feels included and respected. 8-year-old Emilio frowned thoughtfully, like when you tell us to use our words instead of grabbing toys. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the adults, the simple childhood parallel cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Exactly like that, I agreed. Sometimes even grown-ups need reminders about sharing and considering others' feelings. Miguel set down the agreement, his expression conflicted. Mama, can we have a moment to discuss this privately as siblings? I nodded, gesturing toward the study. Take all the time you need. As my children filed out to confer, I turned my attention to my grandchildren, asking about school activities, interests making up for lost time in small ways. Javier discreetly stepped outside to give us privacy while Mateo moved to the kitchen to prepare coffee. 15 minutes later, Miguel, Sofia, and Dante returned. Something in their demeanor had shifted, a newfound sobriety in place of their earlier defensiveness. We've talked it through, Miguel said, serving as spokesperson. And we owe you an apology, a real one. He took a deep breath. After Dad died, it was easier to build our holidays around our children's needs and our social obligations than to consider how lonely you might be. We told ourselves you were fine, that you understood that it was just how things worked out each year. Sofia stepped forward, tears now flowing freely. The truth is, I didn't want to face holidays without Dad. Being here reminded me he was gone, and it was easier to just create distance. I never considered how much worse that made it for you. And when we discovered you had this beautiful mountain home, Dante added, we were shocked, confused, and yes, opportunistic. Instead of being happy you'd found a new chapter, we immediately thought about how it could benefit us. Miguel picked up the agreement. We'll sign this, Mama. Not because we need a legal document to behave like decent human beings, but as a symbol of our commitment to do better, to be better. And we understand if you want us to leave, Sofia added quietly. We arrived uninvited and presumptuous. Our feelings aren't the priority here. I looked at my children, really looked at them, seeing beyond my hurt to the flawed, complicated adults they'd become. In their faces I could see traces of Diego, of myself, of the babies I'd once held, and the teenagers I'd guided. Imperfect people who had made selfish choices, yes, but still my family. I don't want you to leave, I said finally, but I do want you to understand something fundamental. This is my home, my life built on my terms. You are welcome here when invited, when respectful, when genuinely interested in me as a person, rather than what I can provide. I gestured toward the dining table with its elegant settings for 3. I had plans tonight. Dinner with Mateo and Javier, who have shown me more consideration in recent weeks than my own children have in years. Those plans will proceed. Taking a deep breath, I continued. However, there's a lodge in town with excellent last-minute accommodations. I suggest you all get settled there tonight. Then tomorrow, Christmas Day, you're welcome to return as invited guests. We'll have a proper holiday meal, exchange gifts, and begin the process of rebuilding what's been broken. A mixture of relief and chastened understanding passed across their faces as they realized I was offering a path forward, not unconditional forgiveness, but an opportunity to earn back their place in my life. That sounds more than fair, Miguel said quietly. More than we deserve, honestly. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to depart for the lodge, Lucia approached me hesitantly. Abuela, would it be okay if I stayed here with you tonight? I'd like to help with Christmas preparations. Her request, so genuine, so untainted by the adult complications surrounding us, touched me deeply. I'd like that very much, I replied, embracing her for the first time in far too long. Before they left, however, Miguel drew me aside. His expression was uncharacteristically vulnerable. Mama, there's something else you should know, he said, his voice low. My company isn't doing well. I've been counting on a cash infusion from investors that hasn't materialized. When we found out about this house, I thought maybe you could help. The admission of financial desperation explained much about his behavior, but justified none of it. That's why you were so eager to get close to me suddenly, for money. I'm not proud of it, he admitted. I convinced myself it was for the family that you'd want to help if you knew. You could have simply asked, I said, feeling a new wave of disappointment. Instead of going behind my back. Would you have said yes? He asked. I don't know, Miguel, but your approach guaranteed my answer would be no. As he turned to leave, Dante approached next. Unlike Miguel, his face showed no contrition. So you've had money all this time, he said, his voice tight with resentment. Dad made sure you were taken care of while the rest of us struggled. Struggled? I repeated incredulously. You live in a gated community in Santa Fe. Sophia has a second home in Taos. Miguel drives an $80,000 car. What exactly has been your struggle? You don't understand, he insisted. Dad always favored Miguel, his golden boy who followed him into finance. I spent my whole life trying to measure up. And that's somehow my fault, I asked. You could have intervened, made him see me differently. The childish accusation caught me off guard. Dante, you're 35 years old. Whatever issues you had with your father, it's time to stop blaming others for them. He stiffened, eyes narrowing. Easy for you to say now that you've got all this. He gestured around the house. Dad left you set for life, while your father left each of you substantial trusts, I interrupted, revealing information I'd kept private until now. Money you've received and apparently spent. The fact that you've chosen lifestyle inflation over financial security isn't Diego's fault, or mine. Dante's face registered shock, then embarrassment. He left us money when you each turned 30. Mateo handled the disbursements. You didn't think those investment returns just magically appeared, did you? Diego wanted you to believe they were the fruits of your own financial decisions to teach responsibility. I had no idea, he stammered. Clearly, I said. Now I think it's time you joined the others. We've said enough for one night. As they finally departed for the lodge, Sophia lingered on the porch, watching the others get into their vehicles. When we were alone, she turned to me with tears streaming down her face. I miss him, she said simply. Every holiday, every milestone, and seeing you, it just made the loss so real. Don't you think I miss him too? I asked gently. Don't you think I needed my children more after he was gone, not less? She crumpled, then sobbing openly. I know, I've been selfish. Carlos and I are separating, have been for months. I didn't tell anyone because I couldn't face Dad not being here to advise me. So I just pushed everything away, including you. I embraced my daughter, feeling her body shake with grief too long suppressed. You don't have to face it alone, Sophia. That was always your father's way, shouldering everything privately. It doesn't have to be yours. She nodded against my shoulder, then pulled back, wiping her eyes. I should go. The children are waiting. Tomorrow, I promised. We'll talk more tomorrow. After the caravan of vehicles departed for the lodge, an extraordinary silence settled over the house. Javier excused himself to change out of his uniform, promising to return for dinner as planned. Mateo opened the bottle of champagne he'd brought, pouring 3 glasses, one for himself, one for me, and one for Lucia, which I replaced with sparkling cider despite her protests that 15 was practically grown up in Europe. Well, Mateo said, raising his glass, that went rather differently than expected. Did it, Dee? I took a thoughtful sip. They reacted exactly as they always have, with surprise that I might have needs and boundaries of my own. But they signed the agreement, Lucia pointed out clearly, still processing the afternoon's events. That's something, isn't it? It's a beginning, I acknowledged. Actions will matter more than signatures. As Javier returned in civilian clothes and we settled in for our originally planned dinner, Lucia watched us with curious eyes, the elegant table, the sophisticated menu, the easy conversation flowing between the three adults. It was clearly not the grandmother she thought she knew. "You're different here," she observed as I served the beef Wellington. "More, I don't know, yourself." "That's perceptive," I smiled at her. "For a long time after your grandfather died, I defined myself by my relationship to others. Diego's widow, your parents' mother, your grandmother. This place represents the first decision I've made solely for myself in decades." "Why didn't you tell anyone about buying it? I mean—" She considered her question carefully. "I needed space to rediscover who I am when I'm not performing roles for other people. Your parents and uncles have had very specific expectations of who Mama should be. Quiet, accommodating, grateful for whatever attention they deigned to give me." Javier nodded understanding. "Reinvention requires distance sometimes." "Exactly," I agreed. I needed to hear my own voice again without it being immediately dismissed or overridden. Lucia twisted her napkin thoughtfully. "Mom always talks about you like you're fragile, like you couldn't handle change or complexity. But you're not like that at all." "That perception served their narrative," Mateo observed. "If Elena was too fragile to handle family gatherings or too set in her ways to enjoy their modern celebrations, they could exclude her without guilt." "That's harsh," Lucia protested, though her expression suggested she recognized the truth in his words. "But accurate," I said gently. "It's not a pleasant realization, I know, but part of growing up is recognizing that parents are flawed, complicated humans, not the perfect authorities we imagine in childhood." Our dinner stretched into a long evening of honest conversation. Lucia asked questions about her grandfather, about my life before marriage, and children about my teaching career, subjects her parents had rarely explored. I found myself speaking more freely than I had in years, no longer measuring my words against potential judgment or dismissal. When she finally yawned around 11 Haziris, I showed her to one of the guest rooms, the blue room with its magnificent view of the moonlit mountains. "This would have been Mom and Dad's room, wouldn't it?" she asked, taking in the elegant furnishings. "If they'd stayed, probably. Your mother has always preferred blue." "I'm glad they're not here tonight," Lucia confessed quietly. "It's nice having you to myself for once." After she'd settled in, I rejoined Mateo and Javier in the living room where they sat nursing nightcaps by the fire. "She's a remarkable young woman," Mateo observed, "more insightful than her mother was at that age." "She reminds me of you," Javier added with a warm smile, clear-eyed about people's motivations. "I was never that perceptive at 15. I laughed, accepting the small glass of brandy Mateo offered. "But I hope she maintains that clarity. It will serve her well." "What about tomorrow?" Javier asked, returning to practical matters. "Are you ready for the full family invasion?" I considered this, watching the firelight dance across the ceiling. "I think so. Today wasn't about punishing them. It was about establishing that I'm not a supporting character in their lives anymore. I have agency, boundaries, and expectations of my own." They needed that wake-up call. "Agreed," Mateo nodded, "though I suspect old habits will reassert themselves if you're not vigilant." "Probably," I acknowledged, "but I'm not the same person they could dismiss so easily anymore. This place," I gestured around the room that represented my independence, "isn't just a house. It's a statement about who I am now and how I expect to be treated." After Mateo and Javier departed with promises to check in tomorrow, I found myself alone with Lucia in my mountain sanctuary, reflecting on the day's confrontation and surprising resolution. Everything had changed in ways I couldn't have predicted when I first discovered my children's planned invasion. I slept deeply that night, waking Christmas morning to find Lucia already in the kitchen, attempting to make Belgian waffles using a recipe she'd found online. "I wanted to surprise you with breakfast," she explained sheepishly, flour dusting her cheek. "But I think I misunderstood how the waffle iron works." Together we salvaged the breakfast, laughing at the mishaps as we ate at the kitchen island. "Do you think today will be weird?" she asked hesitantly. "After yesterday?" "Probably," I admitted. "Growth usually involves some discomfort." "Are you still mad at them?" I considered this carefully. Not mad exactly. Disappointed, certainly, but also hopeful that yesterday might have been the beginning of something better. By noon, my children began arriving from the lodge more tentatively this time, knocking respectfully and waiting to be invited in. They brought their overnight bags, but left them in their vehicles until explicitly welcomed. Small changes that signaled they'd absorbed at least some of yesterday's lessons. Miguel presented me with a beautifully wrapped package. "We got you something special," he explained. Before we knew about the house. It seems inadequate now, but we hope you'll like it." Inside was an elegant photo album professionally assembled with pictures spanning decades from my wedding to Diego through the births of grandchildren and various family milestones. Many of the photos I'd never seen before. "We realized you might not have copies of a lot of these," Sophia explained, "especially the recent ones of the grandkids." The thoughtfulness of the gift, albeit late, touched me. "Thank you. This means a great deal." The afternoon proceeded with a curious mixture of formality and genuine effort. Without the presumption of control, my children seemed unsure how to behave in my home. They asked permission before using the kitchen, consulted me about activities, and generally exhibited a cautiousness that, while slightly awkward, represented a meaningful shift in dynamics. As we were all gathered in the great room, Miguel's phone rang. He glanced at it, then excused himself to take the call in the hallway. When he returned, his face was ashen. "What's wrong?" Valentina asked immediately. "That was the security company for our house," he said, his voice strained. "There's been a break-in. They think it might have been targeted. The safe in my office was the only thing disturbed." "Oh my God," Sophia gasped. "Was anything taken?" Miguel's eyes met mine, and I saw real fear there. "All our important documents, including the deed to our house, our financial records, even Valentina's jewelry." "We should go," Valentina said, already reaching for her coat. "What about Christmas dinner?" The room fell silent as everyone looked to me. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. My children had planned to commandeer my holiday, and now circumstances were pulling them away. "Go," I said without hesitation. "Your home has been violated. I understand completely." Miguel seemed torn. "Mama, after everything yesterday, I don't want you to think that you're putting your family first," I finished for him. "That's exactly what you should do. We'll have other Christmases." As Miguel and Valentina hurriedly prepared to leave, Sophia approached me. "Should we all go? I feel terrible abandoning you on Christmas Day." "This isn't abandonment," I assured her. "This is responding to an emergency. It's what families do." "Carlos and I can stay," she offered. "The break-in wasn't at our house." "That's thoughtful but unnecessary. Go support your brother. He needs his family right now." As they gathered their things, I noticed Lucia watching me with open admiration. "You're really okay with this?" she asked quietly. "I am," I said truthfully. "Yesterday wasn't about forcing them to celebrate Christmas with me. It was about being treated with basic respect. They're showing that respect now by considering my feelings. That matters more than whether we eat turkey together today." Before they departed, Miguel pulled me aside again. "Mama," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to tell you something. The company papers were in that safe. Without them, you might lose everything." I finished, understanding the implications immediately. He nodded miserably. "I was going to talk to you today. About a loan. Not a handout, but a proper business investment. After yesterday, I realized I should have been straightforward from the beginning. I studied my eldest son's face, so like Diego's yet, with a vulnerability his father rarely showed. "We'll discuss it when you return," I promised. "Today, focus on securing your home. We'll figure out the rest." As they filed out to their cars, Dante lingered behind. Unlike the others, his expression was suspicious rather than grateful. "Convenient timing, don't you think?" he said once we were alone. "Right after we all agree to respect your boundaries, suddenly there's an emergency pulling us away." "What are you suggesting, Dante?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Nothing," he said, but his tone implied otherwise. "Just an observation. You think I'd orchestrate a break-in at your brother's house? To what end?" He shrugged. "You got what you wanted. We acknowledged our mistakes, signed your agreement. Maybe you decided you'd rather have your peaceful Christmas after all." The accusation was so absurd it would have been laughable if it weren't so hurtful. "That's a terrible thing to say," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the anger flaring inside me. "Your brother's home has been violated, his family's security threatened, and your response is to craft conspiracy theories." Dante had the grace to look slightly ashamed, but didn't back down entirely. "It's just strange timing, that's all." "Life is full of strange timing, Dante. That doesn't mean it's manipulated." He nodded curtly, then followed the others outside, leaving me standing alone in my entryway, the silence of the house settling around me once again. But this time the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy with unfinished business. With the knowledge that while yesterday's confrontation had forced acknowledgement, it hadn't healed the deeper wounds that had been festering for years. As I watched their cars disappear down my driveway, I realized that reclaiming my life and rebuilding my family would be a longer, more complex journey than I'd anticipated. The Mountain House had given me the strength to demand respect, but respect was only the beginning. Trust, forgiveness, and genuine connection would take much more time and perhaps more painful honesty to restore. Standing in the doorway of my beautiful mountain sanctuary, I felt both victory and loss. I had won the battle for recognition, but the war for real relationship had only just begun. And as the snow began to fall again, soft and silent, I wondered what the cost of that victory would ultimately be. Christmas afternoon stretched before me, empty and uncertain. The carefully planned holiday meal I'd prepared for my children and grandchildren sat in the refrigerator waiting for guests who had left abruptly. The presents remained under the tree unopened. The house so recently filled with voices had fallen silent again. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, straightening pillows that didn't need straightening, adjusting ornaments that were already perfect. The confrontation had gone as planned, better than planned even. My children had acknowledged their behavior, signed the agreement, shown genuine remorse. Yet victory felt hollow as I faced another Christmas alone. By evening, the snow was falling heavily. I sat by the fire with a glass of wine, watching the flakes dance in the glow of the outdoor lights. My phone had remained silent since Miguel texted to let me know they'd arrived home safely to find police already processing the scene. A knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the security camera, I saw Javier on my porch, snow dusting his shoulders and hair. When I opened the door, the frigid air rushed in along with his concerned face. "I wanted to check on you," he said simply. "It didn't seem right for you to be alone on Christmas." The thoughtfulness of his gesture brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "That's very kind." I managed stepping aside to let him in. "I was just sitting with my thoughts." "Good thoughts or difficult ones?" he asked, shrugging off his heavy coat. "Complicated ones," I admitted. "I got what I wanted: acknowledgement, apologies, boundaries. So why does it still feel like something's missing?" Javier followed me to the living room, settling into the chair opposite mine. "Because establishing boundaries is just the beginning. It's necessary but not sufficient for meaningful relationships." I nodded, turning my wine glass slowly in my hands. "I keep thinking about Dante's accusation that I somehow orchestrated the break-in at Miguel's to drive them away." "That's absurd," Javier said firmly. "Of course it is, but it reveals how he sees me as manipulative, calculating. When did I become the villain in my son's story?" My voice cracked slightly on the last words. "You didn't," Javier assured me. "Dante's perception is about his own issues, not your character." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire. Finally, I asked the question that had been nagging at me all evening. Did I push too hard? Was I too harsh with them? Javier considered this carefully. "You defended your dignity. That's never wrong. But rebuilding relationships is about more than just being right. It's about finding a way forward together." His words resonated deeply. "I'm not sure I know how to do that anymore," I confessed. "For 5 years, I've been the one waiting by the phone, grateful for whatever scraps of attention they offered. Now that I've changed the dynamic, I don't know what comes next." "You take it one day at a time," Javier said gently. "One honest conversation at a time." As if on cue, my phone rang. Sophia's name flashed on the screen. "Mama?" Her voice sounded strained when I answered. "I'm sorry to bother you so late." "It's never a bother, Cariña. What's going on?" "Miguel's break-in was worse than we thought. It wasn't random, it was targeted. The police believe it was orchestrated by one of his business partners." She took a shaky breath. "And it gets worse. The documents they took? Miguel's been involved in some questionable investments. Nothing illegal, but ethically gray. The kind of things Dad would never have approved of." I closed my eyes, absorbing this new information. "Is Miguel in trouble?" "Potentially serious trouble. His partner has essentially leveraged him out of the business. He could lose everything." She paused. "He didn't want me to tell you, but I thought you should know, especially since he'll probably come asking for money." "Thank you for being honest with me, Sophia." After we hung up, I shared the conversation with Javier, who looked troubled. "Financial desperation can drive people to do terrible things," he said. "I've seen it many times in my work." "You think Miguel might have been planning to take advantage of me all along?" "I don't know. but I'm glad you set clear boundaries before money became part of the equation. Later, as Javier prepared to leave, we stood awkwardly at the door. Our relationship had evolved rapidly over these intense days, creating an unexpected intimacy neither of us had anticipated. "Thank you for checking on me," I said. "It meant more than you know. That's what neighbors do," he replied with a smile that suggested he considered us more than just neighbors. "Would you like to come for dinner tomorrow?" I asked impulsively. "I have an entire holiday feast with no one to share it." "I'd like that very much." After he left, I returned to the fireside, but my thoughts had shifted. The emptiness I'd felt earlier had been replaced by something else, a quiet determination to move forward, not just in reclaiming my independence, but in building something new, something authentic. I picked up Diego's letter from where I kept it in my desk drawer and read his words again. "When I'm gone, please don't continue sacrificing. Live the life you want." "I'm trying, Diego," I whispered to the empty room. "I'm finally trying." I awoke early the next morning to discover nearly 2 feet of fresh snow had fallen overnight. The mountain landscape looked transformed, pristine, and silent under its white blanket. As I made coffee, my phone chimed with a weather alert. A severe winter storm warning had been issued with an additional foot of snow expected by evening. I was texting Javier to confirm our dinner plans when another message arrived from Sophia Roads to town, closed due to conditions. "Stuck at lodge until plows come through. Everyone's safe but restless." "How are you holding up?" I assured her I was fine and well prepared for winter weather. My pantry was fully stocked, the generator tested, and the heating system in perfect order, all precautions I'd taken when purchasing a mountain property. My conversation with Javier was briefer. His home was closer to mine on the mountain, accessible by the same private road. "Still on for dinner unless conditions worsen," he confirmed. "Might arrive on snowshoes at this rate." The day stretched peacefully before me. I baked fresh bread, savoring the rhythmic process of kneading dough. I read by the fire, played music I loved, and spoke to no one for several hours. This was the solitude I'd sought in moving here, not the lonely isolation imposed by neglect, but the peaceful solitude of choice. Around noon, the security system alerted me to movement at the end of my driveway. On the camera feed, I spotted a figure trudging through the snow, pulling what appeared to be a sled laden with packages. It took me a moment to recognize Lucia, bundled in so many layers, only her eyes were visible. I rushed to the door, opening it as she approached the porch. "Lucia, what on earth are you doing? It's dangerous to be out in these conditions." "The lodge is only 2 miles away," she said, her breath clouding in the frigid air as she climbed the steps. "And I'm from New Mexico, Abuela. I know how to walk in snow. Come inside this instant before you freeze," I scolded, helping her with the sled. "Does your mother know you're here?" "Of course." She unwound her scarf as we entered the warmth of the house. "They all argued about it, but I told them I wouldn't be trapped in that lodge all day when I could be with you instead." My heart swelled at her determination. "You could have called. I would have understood." "I wanted to be here," she said simply. "Besides, I brought presents. It's still Christmas." Once she'd shed her winter gear and warmed herself by the fire with hot chocolate, Lucia revealed the contents of her makeshift sled, the family's Christmas gifts for me, some books and games, and her own overnight bag. "I may have told them I'm staying until the road's clear," she admitted with a mischievous smile. Mom wasn't thrilled, but Dad sided with me for once. "Carlos supported this expedition." Lucia nodded, looking suddenly serious. "They told me last night about the separation. Dad said seeing you stand up for yourself made him realize he's been letting Mom control everything in their marriage, just like she tries to control everything else." The parallels were striking but uncomfortable. I wasn't trying to inspire marital revelations. "Maybe not, but it happened anyway." Lucia curled her legs beneath her on the sofa. "Can I ask you something personal, Abuela?" "Of course. Were you and Abuelo happy? Really happy?" I considered the question carefully, wanting to give her the honest answer she deserved, rather than the sanitized version parents often offer children. "We had a complex marriage," I said finally. "Your grandfather was brilliant, driven, and in many ways traditional. He provided abundantly, but wasn't always emotionally present. I sacrificed parts of myself to support his vision of our life." I paused, gathering my thoughts. We loved each other deeply, but I don't think either of us fully understood what the other truly needed. "Like Mom and Dad," Lucia said quietly. "Perhaps. Every marriage has its own challenges. The important thing is that both people feel seen and valued. Lucia nodded thoughtfully. That's why you bought this house, isn't it? To finally feel seen. To finally see myself, I corrected gently. To remember who I am beyond the roles I've played for others. The afternoon passed pleasantly as we opened gifts, played board games, and prepared dinner together. Lucia proved surprisingly adept in the kitchen, explaining that she'd been teaching herself to cook through online videos, another passion her mother hadn't encouraged. Mom thinks cooking is outdated, she explained as she expertly diced vegetables. She says women fought too hard to get out of the kitchen to voluntarily go back. Feminism isn't about rejecting traditionally feminine pursuits, I replied. It's about having the freedom to choose which pursuits fulfill you regardless of gender expectations. That's what I tried to tell her, Lucia exclaimed. But she just says I don't understand because I'm too young. Your mother means well, I said, choosing my words carefully. But sometimes our own experiences narrow our vision of what others need. Javier arrived as promised, bearing a bottle of Spanish wine and additional firewood. The three of us enjoyed a festive dinner that, while different from the large family gathering originally planned, felt warm and genuine. Afterward, we sat by the fire, talking late into the evening about everything from literature to politics to Lucia's dreams for college and beyond. I want to study Spanish literature like you did, she confessed. Mom keeps pushing me toward business or law, but I love language. The way it shapes thought and preserves culture. Your passion reminds me of myself at your age, I told her. I fell in love with Cervantes and Garcia Lorca before I ever considered practical career implications. Did you ever regret your choices? She asked. I regret allowing others to diminish my choices, I answered honestly. But the choices themselves never. As the hour grew late, Lucia excused herself to bed, leaving Javier and me alone by the dwindling fire. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the coziness of the room creating an intimacy that felt both new and somehow familiar. You're good with her, Javier observed. She clearly adores you. We understand each other, I said. Perhaps because we're both at transitional points in our lives, she finding her identity, me reclaiming mine. And how is that reclamation going? He asked, his eyes warm in the firelight. It's illuminating, challenging, liberating. I smiled. I spent so many years being what others needed me to be. Wife, mother, professor, widow. It's strange to simply be Elena again. I like Elena, Javier said softly, reaching across to take my hand. Very much. The gesture was unexpected, but not unwelcome. His hand felt warm and solid around mine, the calluses of a man who worked with his hands contrasting with my smoother skin. This is unexpected, I said, not pulling away. Is it? His smile was gentle. I knew from our first conversation that you were remarkable, strong, intelligent, principled. Also stubborn, sometimes impulsive, and apparently capable of terrifying my children, I added wryly. Those aren't flaws, Elena. They're evidence of your spirit. Before I could respond, my phone rang Miguel's ringtone. I reluctantly withdrew my hand from Javier's to answer. Miguel, is everything all right? His voice came through tight with stress. Mama, I'm sorry to call so late. I've been trying to reach you all day, but the storm interfered with cell service. What's happened? It's bad. The partners are claiming I misrepresented investments to clients. They're making me the scapegoat for some losses. His voice broke slightly. I could lose my license, face civil penalties. My reputation will be destroyed. My heart sank. Oh, Miguel, what do you need? I hate to ask this way, but I need a loan, a significant one, just to keep us afloat until I can fight this properly. I closed my eyes, trying to process the request. How significant? His answer made my breath catch. $2 million. Miguel, I know it's a lot, he rushed on. But the house is mortgaged to the hilt, and if I lose my position, we'll lose everything. Think of Emilio and Victoria. The emotional leverage was so transparent it would have been offensive if it weren't so desperately delivered. I need time to consider this, I said finally. We should speak in person once the road's clear. After ending the call, I looked up to find Javier watching me with concern. Your son is in trouble, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, financially and perhaps legally. And he wants you to bail him out. I nodded, suddenly exhausted. The timing is almost poetic, isn't it? For years, they thought I needed their help, financial and otherwise. Now Miguel needs mine desperately. What will you do? Javier asked, his tone carefully neutral. I don't know yet, I admitted. Part of me wants to help immediately. He's still my son regardless of his mistakes. But another part is wary of being used, Javier finished for me. Yes, and concerned that solving this problem for him might enable more of the same behavior that created it. Javier nodded thoughtfully. That's the challenge of parenting adult children, finding the balance between support and enabling. A balance I've clearly struggled with, I sighed. Perhaps I was too accommodating for too long, and now my boundaries seem harsh in comparison. Or perhaps you're finally finding the right balance after years of tipping the scales too far in one direction. His perspective was comforting, but as he prepared to leave the snow having momentarily let up, I still felt unsettled. Standing at the door, Javier seemed to sense my turmoil. Trust yourself, Elena, he said, squeezing my hand. You've spent a lifetime considering others' needs. You won't suddenly become selfish now. After he left, I sat alone in the darkened living room, watching the snow resume its silent fall outside the windows. Diego's words echoed in my mind. Live the life you want. But what did that mean when my children's lives were intertwined with mine, regardless of distance or boundaries? For the first time since buying the mountain house, I wondered if independence might be more complicated than I'd imagined. The next morning dawned bright but frigid. The storm had intensified overnight, dropping another 18 inches of snow. According to the news, all roads into the mountain communities remained closed with no plowing expected until the following day at the earliest. Lucia and I were lingering over breakfast when my phone rang. It was Sophia, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Mama, we have an emergency. The lodge lost power overnight and their generator is malfunctioning. They're evacuating everyone to private homes with working utilities. Are you all right? I asked immediately. We're fine, but freezing. The manager mentioned you're on a different power grid that hasn't been affected. He called Javier, who confirmed your house still has electricity. I understood immediately what was coming. You need somewhere to go. I know this is a lot to ask, especially after everything, Sophia said, her voice small. But we have the children and the temperature is dropping fast. Of course you can come, I interrupted. All of you. This is an emergency, Sophia. Gather what you need and come now. Within the hour, my driveway filled with vehicles, 2 lodge shuttles delivering my family and their belongings through the treacherous conditions. The scene at my front door was chaotic children stomping snow from boots, adults carrying bags and looking both relieved and uncomfortable, everyone talking at once. Thank you for this, Miguel said quietly as he entered, not quite meeting my eyes. Our late-night conversation hung between us unresolved. Dante arrived last, his expression guarded. The universe has a sense of humor, he muttered, trapping us together after everything. Perhaps it's an opportunity rather than a trap, I suggested. The logistics of housing 11 people required immediate attention. I assigned rooms, organized bathroom schedules, and inventoried food supplies while my children settled in awkwardness, gradually giving way to practicality. By mid-afternoon, a routine had emerged, the younger children playing board games in the great room, teenagers helping with meal preparation, adults taking turns with various tasks. This is surreal, Sophia observed as we prepared dinner together. Like those Christmas gatherings we used to have at the old house, but now you're in my space, not the other way around, I finished for her. She nodded, looking somewhat ashamed. I never realized how that felt for you, coming into our homes, following our rules, fitting into our schedules. It wasn't always unpleasant, I said fairly. Just unbalanced. As evening approached, a new complication arose. The storm had affected cell service throughout the region. Our connection to the outside world became increasingly tenuous, with calls dropping and texts failing to send. My partners have been trying to reach me, Miguel said, frustration evident as he paced the kitchen. This delay could cost me everything. There's nothing you can do until the road's clear, Carlos pointed out reasonably. Maybe use this time to step back and consider other perspectives. Miguel shot him a dark look. Easy for you to say. Your career isn't hanging by a thread. No, Carlos agreed evenly. Just my marriage. The blunt acknowledgement silenced the room. Sophia froze where she stood at the counter, her eyes filling with tears. Perhaps this conversation would be better continued privately, I suggested gently, but Carlos shook his head. No, I think we've had enough privacy, enough polite fictions. If this family is going to heal, maybe we need more honesty, not less. What's that supposed to mean? Dante demanded. It means we're all pretending, Carlos said, looking around at each person. Pretending Miguel's financial troubles appeared overnight when he's been cutting corners for years. Pretending Sophia and I aren't separating because she can't face difficult emotions. Pretending Dante isn't bitter about his father's approval that never came. How dare you? Dante began, but Carlos continued calmly. And all of you pretending Elena is somehow less capable, less independent than she actually is because it suited your narrative, your convenience. That's enough, Miguel snapped. You don't get to lecture us about family dynamics when you're walking out on yours. I'm not walking out, Carlos replied. I'm asking for change, for growth, for real connection instead of performance. He glanced at me. Something your mother seems to understand better than any of you. The tension in the room was palpable. Valentina had moved protectively closer to Miguel. Isabella watched her husband Dante with a mixture of concern and something else recognition, perhaps. Sophia stood rigid, tears now flowing freely down her face. This isn't helping anyone, I said finally. We're all tired, stressed, and trapped together in a difficult situation. Let's take a breath. No, Carlos is right, Sophia said unexpectedly, her voice stronger than I'd anticipated. We do need honesty, starting with me. She turned to face me directly. Mama, I've been jealous of you, of this new life you've created, your independence, your courage to start over, while I've been trapped in a marriage that stopped working years ago, too afraid to admit it. Sophia, Carlos began, but she shook her head. Let me finish. I didn't exclude you from holidays because you reminded me of Dad's death. I excluded you because you reminded me of possibilities I was too afraid to pursue. Her confession hung in the air, raw and revelatory. Before anyone could respond, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The house plunged into sudden darkness. Perfect timing. Dante's voice came dryly through the blackness. Just when things were getting interesting. Emergency procedures took precedence over emotional revelations as we located flashlights, checked the generator, which had failed to automatically engage, and ensured the children were safe. Javier arrived shortly after having seen my house go dark from his cabin. With his help, we got the generator running, restoring partial power to essential systems, enough for heat the kitchen and minimal lighting. The main grid suffered massive damage, he explained as we huddled in the kitchen, the only fully lit room. Could be days before repairs reach us up here. Days. Miguel looked stricken. That's not possible. I have to get back to Albuquerque immediately. Nobody's going anywhere, Javier said with the calm authority of his profession. The roads are impassable and conditions are deteriorating. We need to focus on keeping everyone safe and comfortable until help arrives. His practical assessment shifted our collective focus from interpersonal drama to survival logistics. We organized sleeping arrangements to consolidate in the areas with heat-inventoried food supplies and established conservation protocols for power and water. Working together toward these immediate goals seemed to temporarily suspend the tensions that had been building. By the time we'd settled into our reduced circumstances, exhaustion had claimed most of the family. The children were asleep in the great room where mattresses had been arranged near the fireplace. Most adults had retired to their assigned spaces, leaving just Javier, Dante, and me sitting at the kitchen table with cups of tea. We should get some rest, I suggested, noting the lateness of the hour. In a minute, Dante said, an unusual hesitance in his voice. I wanted to ask Officer Cruz something. He turned to Javier. The break-in at Miguel's house. Does it seem suspicious to you? The timing, I mean. Javier studied him carefully. Are you still suggesting your mother orchestrated it? I tensed, but Dante shook his head. No, I was angry and looking for someone to blame. He glanced at me apologetically before continuing. But something about it doesn't add up. Miguel said his partners are making him a scapegoat, but what if it's worse than that? What if they orchestrated the break-in to retrieve documents that implicated them? Javier considered this. It's possible. Corporate financial crimes often involve destroying evidence or creating false narratives. Would you be willing to make some inquiries when communications are restored? Dante asked. Unofficially, I mean, for the family's sake. The request surprised me, not just the practical nature of it, but the fact that it came from Dante, who had been the most resistant to reconciliation. I can reach out to colleagues in that jurisdiction, Javier agreed. But Miguel would need to be forthcoming about the full situation. I'll talk to him, Dante promised, rising from the table. Thank you. He paused, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. And Mama, I'm sorry about what I said yesterday, about you manipulating the situation. It was unfair. Thank you, Hijo, I said simply. After he left, Javier and I sat in companionable silence, the generator's distant hum providing white noise in the otherwise quiet house. That was unexpected, I finally said. Family crises have a way of clarifying priorities, Javier observed. When survival becomes the immediate concern, other grievances often fall into perspective. Is that your professional assessment officer, Cruz? I asked, smiling slightly. My personal experience, actually, he replied, his expression turning serious. My wife and I separated after I was shot in the line of duty. The crisis should have brought us together, but instead it exposed how fundamentally disconnected we'd become. I'm sorry, I said, reaching for his hand across the table. I didn't know. It was 3 years ago, he said, his fingers wrapping around mine. Long enough to gain perspective, to realize that sometimes relationships end, not because anyone did something wrong, but because people grow in different directions. Like Sophia and Carlos, I mused. Perhaps, though they seem to still be fighting for understanding, which is more than my ex and I managed. He squeezed my hand gently. The question isn't whether relationships change, they always do. It's whether people are willing to change with them to rebuild something new when the old structure no longer serves. His words resonated deeply, echoing my own thoughts about my relationships with my children. The old dynamic no longer worked, but could we build something new from the ruins? We should get some rest, Javier said, releasing my hand. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the wind howl outside my window and the occasional creaks of a house full of sleeping people, I reflected on Carlos's words from earlier. Real connection instead of performance. Perhaps that was what I'd been missing all along, not just inclusion in family gatherings, but authentic connection beneath the surface performances of family. And maybe this forced proximity, this crisis that had thrown us all together in my space, was the catalyst needed to build those genuine connections. With that thought providing unexpected comfort, I drifted into sleep, wondering what revelations tomorrow might bring. The following morning brought more snow and the news that roads would remain closed for at least another day. Power crews were working on the main lines, but our area would be among the last to receive attention due to its remote location. We were effectively cut off, dependent on our own resources and each other. After a simple breakfast prepared on the gas stove, the family naturally divided into task groups. Sophia and Valentina organized activities for the younger children. Carlos and Isabella took inventory of our remaining supplies. Miguel and Dante surprisingly headed outside together to clear pathways around the house and check the generator's fuel level. I found myself in the kitchen with Lucia and Marco preparing lunch from our dwindling fresh ingredients. They're actually talking, Lucia observed, watching her father and uncles through the window. Not arguing, actually having a conversation. Necessity creates strange alliances, I remarked. Do you think it will last? Marco asked skeptically. Once we're back to normal, I mean. That depends on what normal becomes, I replied. Sometimes it takes a disruption to create space for a new pattern. By afternoon, the initial awkwardness of our forced cohabitation had evolved into something approaching camaraderie. The shared challenges of limited power-rationed water and meal preparation from restricted supplies created a natural teamwork that transcended recent tensions. I observed my family with new eyes, not as the people who had excluded me, but as individuals struggling with their own challenges, making choices both good and poor, just as I had throughout my life. Miguel, despite his financial troubles, revealed unexpected resourcefulness, rigging a snowmelt system on the covered deck to supplement our water supply. Sophia, normally so controlled, showed genuine warmth while teaching the younger children to play card games she remembered from her own childhood. Dante, perhaps most surprisingly, exhibited patience and technical skill while helping Javier repair a problematic pipe that had begun to freeze. During a quiet moment in the kitchen, Valentina approached me hesitantly. Elena, can we speak privately? I nodded, leading her to the small study where we could close the door. I owe you an apology, she began without preamble. Not just for Christmas, but for years of manipulation, I suppose. Manipulation. I hadn't expected this specific acknowledgement. She nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. I've been the one suggesting to Miguel that including you in our holidays would be complicated. that you were fragile after Diego died, that you might be overwhelmed by our lively household." "Why?" I asked simply. Valentina sighed, sinking into a chair. "Because I was jealous. Miguel respected you in a way he's never respected me. When a decision was difficult, he'd always say, 'What would Mama advise?' Never, 'What does Valentina think?'" She shook her head. "It was easier to keep you at a distance than to compete with your influence." The honesty was startling. "I never intended to overshadow you, Valentina. I know that now. Watching you these past days, how you've managed this crisis, how you've created this new life, I realize I've been blaming you for my own insecurities." She looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Miguel and I were in trouble, not just financially. We've been drifting apart for years, focusing on appearances rather than substance. Seeing how you've reinvented yourself, it's made me question everything." Her vulnerability touched me deeply. "It's never too late to make changes, Carina, if that's what you both want." "I don't know what Miguel wants anymore," she admitted. "But I know I want more than what we've settled for. I want authenticity like you found here." Our conversation was interrupted by excited voices from the great room. We emerged to find everyone gathered around Javier, who held his emergency radio. "The plows have reached the main road," he announced. "They expect to clear our access road by tomorrow morning. Power crews are following behind them." The news was met with a mixture of relief and surprisingly something that looked almost like disappointment from some family members. "So we'll be able to leave tomorrow," Miguel confirmed, his expression conflicted. "Weather permitting," Javier nodded. "Though the situation in Albuquerque remains complicated. Many areas still without power, some flooding from burst pipes." "What about your house, Miguel?" I asked. "Have you heard anything?" He shook his head. "Nothing specific, but my partners have apparently been trying to reach me. They've left urgent messages with the lodge manager." "That reminds me," Dante said, looking at his brother with uncharacteristic directness. "I spoke with Officer Cruz about your break-in. He thinks there might be more to investigate about the timing and circumstances." Miguel stiffened visibly. "That's not necessary. It was just an unfortunate coincidence." "Was it?" Dante pressed. "Or is there something you're not telling us about these business troubles?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Miguel, who suddenly looked cornered. "This isn't the time," he said tightly. "I think it's exactly the time," Carlos interjected. "Before you ask Elena for $2 million, perhaps you should explain exactly what's happened." Miguel's head snapped up. "How do you know about that? These walls are thin." Carlos shrugged. "And your voice carries when you're stressed." I moved to stand beside Miguel, who looked both angry and frightened. "Let's all stay calm," I suggested. "Miguel, if there's more to this situation, now is the time to share it. We're family. We can face this together." For a moment I thought he would refuse. Then his shoulders slumped, the facade of confidence finally crumbling. "I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Cut corners to show profits. Nothing illegal, but ethically questionable." When clients started asking difficult questions, my partners positioned me as the scapegoat. "Why?" Dante demanded. "Why risk everything you've built?" Miguel looked up, his eyes haunted. "Because I've been trying to live up to Dad's legacy my entire life. His financial brilliance, his success. Every year the pressure to perform, to exceed expectations. It became unbearable." The raw honesty of his confession silenced the room. I felt a physical ache in my chest, recognizing how Diego's driven nature had shaped our son in ways neither of us had fully understood. "Miguel," I said gently, "your father would never have wanted you to compromise your integrity for financial success. Never." "You don't understand," he insisted. "Dad always pushed for more. Better returns, smarter investments. How could I admit I couldn't match him?" "He was hard on you," I acknowledged, but not because he expected perfection. Because he saw your potential and wanted you to fulfill it. On your own terms, not by copying his methods. "How do you know that?" Miguel asked, desperation in his voice. "He never said that to me." I hesitated, then made a decision. "Wait here." In my bedroom, I retrieved a box I'd brought from the old house, Diego's personal papers that I'd discovered after his death. Returning to the great room, I handed Miguel a folder containing letters Diego had written but never sent. "Your father wasn't good at expressing emotions," I explained as Miguel opened the folder with trembling hands. "But he wrote these over the years. Letters to each of you that he kept private. As Miguel read silently, tears began streaming down his face. Sophia and Dante moved closer, reading over his shoulders. He was proud of me, Miguel whispered, even when I made different choices. He was proud of all of you, I confirmed. In his own way, though, he struggled to show it. For the next hour, my children took turns reading their father's unsent letters, expressions of pride, concerned love, and hopes for their futures. Letters that revealed a man more emotionally complex than the driven provider they had known. "Why didn't you share these earlier?" Sophia asked, wiping tears. "I only found them after he died," I explained. "And then, I wasn't sure if they would help or hurt." Diego was complicated. He placed tremendous pressure on himself, and sometimes that extended to you all. I wanted to protect you from feeling you had to live up to impossible standards. But in trying to protect us, we missed knowing this side of him, Dante said quietly. The father who noticed our efforts, not just our achievements. I made the same mistake your father did, I admitted, thinking I knew what was best without asking what you needed. The revelation created a new openness between us. As evening fell, we gathered around the fireplace, no longer strangers forced together by circumstance, but family choosing connection despite our differences. Conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years, touching on memories, regrets, hopes, and possibilities. When Javier joined us after checking road conditions, he was met with genuine inclusion rather than polite tolerance. The children, sensing the shift in atmosphere, relaxed into play without the earlier tension. Even Dante seemed more at peace, his defensive edges softened. Later, as the household settled for our final night of imposed togetherness, Miguel sought me out on the deck, where I'd gone for a moment of solitude beneath the stars. "Mama, about the loan," he began. "We'll discuss it when we return to Albuquerque," I said firmly, "with a proper financial advisor present. If I'm going to help you, it will be with clear terms and expectations. Not as a bailout, but as a structured plan for rebuilding." He nodded, accepting the boundary without argument. "That's fair. More than fair, considering everything. You're still my son, Miguel. I want to help you succeed, but on a foundation of honesty and integrity, not appearances and shortcuts." "I understand." He hesitated, then asked the question that clearly weighed on him. "How did you do it, Mama? Start over at your age? Find this courage?" I considered the question, looking out at the snow-covered mountains gleaming under the moonlight. "I realized I had spent decades defining myself through others' eyes," I said finally. "Diego's wife, your mother, the professor, the widow. One day I simply asked myself, who is Elena when no one is watching? What does she want when no one is expecting anything from her? This house was my answer." "It suits you," he said softly, "more than the old house ever did. Because I chose it for myself, not to accommodate everyone else's needs." Miguel was quiet for a long moment. "I think that's what I need to learn. How to make choices that aren't about meeting expectations or maintaining appearances." "It's never too late to start," I told him, squeezing his hand. "That's the gift your father ultimately gave me. The freedom to begin again." As we stood together in the crisp mountain air, I felt something shift between us. Not a complete healing, but the beginning of a more authentic relationship. One based on mutual respect rather than obligation or convenience. The storm that had trapped us together had done more than test our resilience. It had forced us to see each other clearly, perhaps for the first time in years. Spring came to the mountains with gentle persistence, melting the snowdrifts into burbling streams and coaxing pale green buds from dormant branches. I'd been in my mountain home for nearly 4 months now, watching the seasons transform the landscape from pristine white to vibrant awakening. Much like the land around me, my relationship with my children had undergone its own thaw, gradual, sometimes halting, but undeniably progressing. The changes hadn't happened overnight. January brought tentative phone calls, careful in tone and duration. February saw my first invitations to their homes, genuine invitations with reasonable notice, not last-minute obligations or afterthoughts. March introduced a new pattern of Sunday video calls with the grandchildren scheduled weekly rather than occurring sporadically when guilt prompted connection. Small changes that together represented significant shifts in the family dynamic. On this particular April morning, I stood on my deck with coffee, surveying the property I'd come to love so deeply. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and new growth, invigorating and peaceful simultaneously. My phone chimed with a text from Lucia, who had become my most consistent correspondent since Christmas. Finished my college application essay. Can I email it to you for feedback? It's about finding your voice later in life, inspired by someone I know. I smiled, typing back my enthusiastic agreement. Lucia's transformation over the past months had been particularly rewarding to witness, from somewhat self-absorbed teenager to thoughtful young woman developing her own value system often distinct from her parents' materialistic priorities. The sound of tires on gravel drew my attention to the driveway where Javier's truck appeared around the bend. Since Christmas, our friendship had deepened into something neither of us had anticipated, a companionship that brought richness to both our lives. Not romance exactly, though perhaps edging in that direction with patient deliberation. We were both cautious people who valued clarity and intention in relationships. "Morning," he called, emerging from the vehicle with a bakery box in one hand and gardening tools in the other. "Ready to tackle those raised beds we talked about?" We had planned a vegetable garden for the sunny southern exposure of the property, my first attempt at growing food rather than just ornamental plants. Javier, with his practical knowledge of mountain growing conditions, had offered to help design and build the beds. "Absolutely," I replied, meeting him at the bottom of the deck stairs. Though I'm not sure I've fully convinced myself that I have any talent for gardening. "Talent is overrated," he said, handing me the bakery box. "Persistence matters more. Plants respond to consistent attention, not natural aptitude." "Rather like relationships," I observed, accepting the pastries with a grateful smile. "Exactly like relationships," he agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. We spent the morning measuring and constructing the cedar frames that would hold my first gardening endeavor. The physical work was satisfying in ways my previous life had rarely offered, creating something tangible, useful, and potentially nourishing. "Your son called me yesterday," Javier mentioned casually as we broke for lunch on the deck. "Miguel, whatever for. He wanted to know if I'd be here this weekend. Said he didn't want to interrupt if we had plans." The consideration implicit in this question, so different from the entitled assumptions of Christmas, warmed me unexpectedly. "What did you tell him?" "That he should talk to you directly about your availability, not assume I keep your calendar." "Wise answer," I smiled. "He's trying." "They all are in their ways. Imperfectly, inconsistently, but genuinely trying. It's more than I expected, honestly." "You changed the equation, Elena," Javier observed. "Made them see you as a complete person with agency and boundaries, not just a convenient mom figure to be accessed when needed and ignored when not." Before I could respond, my phone rang, Miguel's name appearing on the screen as if our conversation had summoned him. "Mama," he greeted me when I answered. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all. Javier and I are just having lunch after building some garden beds." A brief pause. "That's actually why I'm calling. Victoria and I were wondering if we could bring the kids up this weekend. Emilio's been asking about your mountain house for weeks, and we thought a proper visit might be nice." The careful phrasing, a request rather than an assumption, wasn't lost on me. "That would be lovely, Miguel. When were you thinking of arriving?" "Saturday morning, if that works for you. We'd get a room at that lodge in town, of course." Another meaningful difference from Christmas: no presumption they would stay in my home without explicit invitation. "The lodge is lovely, but you're welcome to use the guest rooms if you prefer." I offered, finding I genuinely meant it. "Just let me know so I can prepare accordingly." After finalizing the details and ending the call, I looked up to find Javier watching me with quiet approval. "That sounded promisingly respectful," he observed. "It was," I agreed. Though I'm still adjusting to this new version of Miguel who actually asks rather than informs. "Do you trust it will last?" I considered the question carefully. I trust that the dynamic has fundamentally changed. Whether every interaction will reflect that change perfectly, that's another matter. Old habits resurface, but the baseline has shifted. "Because you shifted first," he pointed out. "You stopped accepting the role they'd assigned you." Later that afternoon, as Javier was leaving, Mateo called to check in our weekly conversation that had continued faithfully since Christmas. I brought him up to date on the garden project and Miguel's upcoming visit. "Sounds like progress continues," he noted approvingly. "How are you feeling about all of it?" I glanced around at my home, so thoroughly mine in every detail, from the art on the walls to the garden beds taking shape outside. "Content," I replied truthfully. "Not because everything is perfect with my children, but because my happiness no longer depends on their approval or inclusion." "That's the real victory," Mateo observed. "Independence of spirit, not just living situation." That evening, as twilight settled over the mountains, I walked the perimeter of my property, mentally mapping where I might plant flowering shrubs to attract butterflies, where a bench might offer the perfect spot for morning meditation, where wind chimes would catch the afternoon breezes, small additions to make this place even more distinctly mine. My phone chimed with an email from Lucia, her college essay attached with a nervous message asking for my honest opinion. I settled into my favorite chair by the window to read it, touched that she valued my perspective so highly. The essay was beautifully written, exploring how witnessing my transformation had inspired her own reconsideration of priorities and authentic self-expression. She wrote of Christmas Eve, the night she'd stayed behind when the others went to the lodge, as a turning point in her understanding of what it meant to live intentionally rather than according to others' expectations. In watching my grandmother reclaim her identity beyond the roles assigned to her, she wrote, I began to question which parts of my own identity were authentic and which were performances designed to secure approval. Her courage in establishing boundaries even when painful showed me that genuine relationships must be built on mutual respect rather than obligation or convenience. Tears welled unexpectedly as I read her words. Of all the outcomes I'd imagined when I purchased this mountain sanctuary, peace-independent self-discovery, I never anticipated becoming a model of empowerment for my teenage granddaughter. The realization crystallized something I'd been feeling increasingly over the past months. This home, initially acquired as a reaction to exclusion, a statement of independence born from hurt, had evolved into something far more positive, not a retreat from painful relationships, but a foundation for authentic ones. Not an ending, but a beginning. I composed a thoughtful response to Lucia, praising both her writing skills and her insights, then stepped onto the deck to watch the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The mountain air carried the scent of earth, awakening of possibilities unfolding. 5 months ago, I'd stood in this same spot nursing wounds of exclusion and steeling myself for confrontation. Now I stood in quiet anticipation of Saturday's family visit, not desperate for their approval, not anxious about their judgment, but genuinely looking forward to continuing our collective journey toward more honest connection. My mountain house had served its purpose not as the dramatic statement of independence I'd initially imagined, but as the solid foundation for a life rebuilt on my own terms. A life with room for family, for friendship, for growth, for discovery. A life where being forgotten for Christmas had led through unexpected pathways to being truly seen for the first time in years. I smiled up at the emerging stars, feeling both grounded and free, like the mountains themselves standing firm while reaching skyward.